Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and this week I have the book with me this time. Third time we're covering Crossroads of Twilight, where I actually got a little bit further than I intended to, and have ultimately decided to include the additional content in this week's diary instead of next week's diary. And I think that's because whenever I finish one of these books that I do diaries for, I tend to include like a pretty hefty spoiler-free portion at the beginning. I do for all the diaries to a degree, but on the last one especially, I do like an overall spoiler-free impressions of the book entire, not just that week's reading, but the entire book. And that kind of leads those videos to be somewhat longer, and this week's reading was going to be very short without these couple of additional chapters in there, so I just kind of figured that I would add them in to this week's reading because it wouldn't hurt this week's diary, and it will help next week's diary for sure. This week we are covering chapters 16 through 24 of the book, where originally I had only planned to get through Egwene's POV. That was about 5 chapters plus a couple additional White Tower chapters of following that immediately. And that was basically going to be all that I covered, but now it's going to be that, plus 2 more chapters after that, which cover Cadsuane and Rand stuff going on. About 7 hours for this week's reading, which is not as much as last week, but 7 hours is a little bit more typical, a little bit more my normal for any of these diaries, which puts my total for this book up to this point 23 and a half hours, which, you know, I'm suspecting by the time I finish the book, because I have, I believe, 6 chapters remaining, 3 Perrin, 2 Matt, 1 Egwene, and then the epilogue, which is like 2 pages or something. I believe that those 6 chapters combined will probably take me a handful of hours left, somewhere between 5 and 7 more hours to read, which would put this at, you know, comparatively pretty timely with the last couple of books. Still a bit too long, you know, a lot of this book has been bloated, as I've said, but as far as the content for this week's reading, it's not been too bad. I've enjoyed it a lot. Spoiler-free impressions of this week's reading, by far the best week so far. This third week was actually pretty great. I really enjoyed Egwene's chapters, and I've enjoyed just being able to read Egwene's content in general. I've been really missing all of her material, all of her POV for the last couple of books. Basically, it's been since, I don't know, probably 2/3 of the way through like Path of Daggers since we last saw her in any significant manner. So, and even then it was like kind of a cliffhanger type of moment. So I've been like really waiting to get a little bit more of that. And although there's not like, you know, no big action set piece here, this isn't like the climax or anything like that of a plot line. It is driven more than most of the other Crossroads of Twilight plot lines have been driven up to this point. I would say Egwene's content was actually genuinely good, like very much bordering on great. There's a lot of content here that I'm actually pretty excited about, and then the couple chapters after that with Cadsuane and Rand it was okay. Like nothing really happened in them. It's whatever. But the Egwene stuff, really happy about that. But I think that's all I really need to say for spoiler-free type of stuff. I do want this video to be a little bit shorter, even though it's not going to be, because there's actually some things to talk about this time. And that's what I said last week, and it ended up not working out. So I'm going to try to keep things slightly shorter, and we'll just jump right into things. So we'll start with chapters, 16 through 20, which are Egwene's POV. I read all of the Egwene chapters in one day, by the way. That's how much I actually was enjoying being able to read her stuff again. So 16 sees us finally back in Egwene's shoes, kind of observing the area around Tar Valon with the rebel Aes Sedai army and like what's his bucket? I can't remember. Gareth's army kind of around. They've taken all of the land entrances to the city. They hold all of those land passages to Tar Valon, so they're not able to get supplies that way. Tar Valon still gets supplies by the river, and they don't have the rebels don't have the capacity to actually be able to stop any of those supplies getting in, unfortunately, but they do have some control over the city through at least the land passages. Gareth does want to use gateways, however, wants to use magic with the Aes Sedai to actually take the army and infiltrate the city directly. But Egwene doesn't really want to infiltrate the city directly. She does not want combat between Aes Sedai again, a second time following the breaking of the tower, back several books ago at this point. She doesn't want that, so she tells Gareth's like, no, we're not going to do that right now. Like, if there's no other option, it seems like she might be willing to do that, but that's not really her plan right now. She doesn't want an Aes Sedai versus Aes Sedai assault. Also in the chapter, we see Delaena, another Aes Sedai, telling Egwene of some of the other sitters, the sitters of the hall, I guess the Rebel Hall. Some of them desire to negotiate with Elaida, to make negotiations with Tar Valon proper, with the White Tower proper, I suppose I should say, to potentially be accepted back into the ranks of the tower, or to come up with some sort of way to reunify the tower in whatever terms that might be. And Egwene actually listens to this front from Delaena as like, you know what, yeah, I need some time to come up with my own plan right now, so this isn't a bad way to, take up a little bit of time. So she decides to, task one of the other Aes Sedai, I think named Beanine, to go and start opening negotiations, to plan for some of that. Of course, the hall has to actually agree on the ways to do that, but it is a plan of action, although Egwene only really allows it under the condition that Elaida has to resign and go into exile. And since she knows that those are terms that Elaida is not going to accept, Egwene is just kind of using this as like a buffer period to give her time until, sometime else, whatever it is her other plan is, or whatever other plan she's able to form in the meantime. Chapter 17 sees a very brief little snippet from Delaena at the start that makes me or really got me suspicious about her. I don't know if we knew that she was Black Aja before this point, but I got really suspicious about her in this chapter because of this little snippet at the start, and especially, more or less confirmed by it being reiterated through this chapter and the next couple of chapters that Halima is Delaena's secretary or something like that. That's kind of what they're posing as. Given that kind of closeness between those two characters, and of course we know Halima is Arengar of Forsaken, it makes it pretty obvious that Delaena is Black Aja. Like I said, I don't know if we knew this. It's been a couple of books at this point. If that was something that I knew and I forgot, I'm sorry, but otherwise I know now. Delaena is Black Aja, and she seems to be pretty satisfied that her suggesting this, making agreements with or trying to negotiate with Elaida, it seems like a little act of chaos on her part, and she seems to be satisfied that that might be working to some degree. So we'll see what goes on there. Even so, Egwene is pretty okay with the negotiations. Like I said, they're just kind of a pretense while she comes up with a better idea. She insists in Chapter 17 for Beanine and the others to make sure that things like the fact that they know how to travel does not get revealed to the White Tower. Also things like the ferrets that this Saladar camp ended up sending to the White Tower when Elaida called for all Aes Sedai to return, as to try to upheave the White Tower a little bit, make sure that those ferrets, as they referred to them, are not revealed either. So any secrets that are pertinent to the rebel Aes Sedai need to not be revealed whenever negotiations and stuff are happening. That is something that Egwene desires. And then in the chapter, Egwene goes and visits a tent where it seems like there are women specifically with enough power with Earth to create Cuendillar, are now creating Cuendillar in the camp, and this seems to be the plan for how to fund the army at this point, to fund Gareth's army, because Cuendillar is a rare thing and it goes for a pretty high price. So all of the women, I think it was mentioned that Egwene discovered how to make Cuendillar because Moghedien had kind of inferred that it was possible to do, and then Egwene was able to puzzle it together based off of those inferences. So she was able to reveal it to the camp, and all of the Aes Sedai who have enough power with Earth to be able to make Cuendillar are being tasked with doing that so that they have a means of funding the army. That's pretty fun. We learn in the chapter as well that Nicola, who's in the tent making Cuendillar when she is sent to go do a different class with one of the other Aes Sedai, I forget the exact details, but Nicola has apparently been revealed to be a foreteller. She can foretell things, and she has been foretelling things, although it seems pretty dubious what things she's supposedly foretelling are actually foretellings and what she's just trying to use to her advantage, question mark. She has another one of the sisters with her, whoever the other one that had to swear to Egwene. I forget the name off the top of my head. I didn't write it down in here, but she has another one like with her all the time specifically to write down and tell her what the things she foretells are. So it seems like there's a little bit of mischief going on with the character there, but interesting to know that there is a character doing foretellings here in Nicola. We'll see what happens with that. Furthermore, it is inferred at the very end of the chapter that Egwene has a sort of plan with the fastest Quendalar makers, the ones who are able to make Quendalar the fastest, that she has a specific plan for them, whether that's the same plan as like using the Quendalar to sell to fund the army, or if she has another purpose for making Quendalar that we don't know about. I don't know, but she has some sort of plan that we don't really know the details of. In either case, she does go back to her tent in chapter 18, reaches her own tent, finds that Swan is there waiting for her to, report some of her findings. Halima also happens to be there. Halima is sent away and seems to be somewhat suspiciously upset by being sent away. Like I said, this was kind of where it is noted several times quite plainly that she is Delana's secretary, which is like, okay, Delana's definitely Black Aja if Halima is her secretary. Like, there's no ands, ifs, or buts about that. And once Halima is gone, Swan does report to Egwene having seen a partial list of some of the new sitters in the White Tower for Elaida, and, we see that trend that was discussed at some other point. Was that in the prologue? I think that was in the prologue, probably, where we learned that most of the sitters of the White Tower, most of the new sitters anyway, are people that, probably shouldn't be, or rather, it's kind of suspicious that, all of the new sitters are much younger than typical, that they haven't been Aes Sedai for nearly as long as sitters tend to be before they are raised up to that position. So there's something going on there, and now Swan is kind of being tasked with investigating what the implications of that are, what might be causing that, and then after this, the two of them also discuss together some of the other political things that are generally just going on around the camp, and with Tar Valon, with the rebels, tower guards not patrolling Tar Valon, so crime seems to be up in the city. There seems to be something up there, because that's not typical. There's clearly a reason why the tower guards are not really patrolling the city as much anymore. Maybe it's because, there's nobody really entering or leaving because the rebels hold all of the land passages. I don't know. That was just an idea that came to my mind. There are rumors of Era Daman that are kind of going crazy, but of course, rumors are rumors, and across an entire continent, nobody knows what's true. Of course, this, kind of refers to, I believe, the very first scene, if I'm not mistaken, of the prologue, which I love seeing the prologue referenced in tangible ways without the prologue scenes just being main character POVs, so that was pretty nice. None of the rumors that are really discussed or mentioned in this moment are exactly what we see in the prologue, but clearly whatever's going on in Era Daman is going to be important, and like I said, I love to see that being referenced in the chapter. Very nice. Some more things include the bargain with Seafolk, not going to be taken well by the Hall with the sitters of the rebel Aes Sedai once they discover it, because at this point, Egwene and Swan are trying to keep that a little bit secret, of course, because, that's a pretty big bargain, and having to sacrifice Aes Sedai to teach the Seafolk stuff is not really something that they want. It's not going to be something that they're going to accept very easily. The kin also can't be hidden from the Hall very much longer, so they need to come up with some way to kind of counteract that before it becomes a problem. And then we also get, again, kind of an implication through Egwene's POV that she's planning something with regards to the oaths, the 3 oaths. Very clearly, she's pretty heavily in the camp of no, the 3 oaths, the oath rod and stuff is what makes us Aes Sedai, and therefore completely getting rid of that requirement to be Aes Sedai wouldn't be right, so she doesn't want to do that, but she does seem pretty intent on, she considers this idea of the oath rod a lot, because as a result of the kin, they know that the oath rod is very heavily affecting the lifespan of Aes Sedai. they could live very much longer if they weren't tied to the three oaths for whatever reason. No idea why that would be the case. I don't understand the mechanics of that. But frankly, I don't need to understand the mechanics of it. It is interesting enough on its own. So it makes me assume that Egwene might be planning some way for like Aes Sedai, if they want to just live a lot longer, to be able to like retire from being Aes Sedai, so to speak, to retire the three oaths and just be able to live at some point, that she might be wanting to make this some sort of thing that Aes Sedai can choose to do. I'm not entirely sure, but that's my guess at what she's kind of planning, since all of her plans throughout the book, through her chapters up to this point, have been very vague, definitely not revealed to us, the readers, that's for sure. But that does lead us into chapter 19, which sees the return of some Aes Sedai, which had been mentioned to have gone to investigate that kind of beacon that Rand and Nynaeve obviously caused, cleansing the taint. So we're starting to move slightly forward in time, where all the previous POVs were kind of, noticing that. And then Elaine's POV at the very end, I believe, observed the very winking out of that beacon. Now we're kind of seeing the aftermath of it a tiny bit, with some of the Aes Sedai gone to investigate it. They come back to report to the hall, because Egwene goes to the hall, this meeting of the hall, to kind of figure out the information that's going on and to be a part of that discussion to some degree. Shadar Logoth is now a crater, a very big crater. I believe it was like 3 mile by 1 mile big, or some dimension like that. A very massive crater. It's gone now. It has disappeared. And then it's also revealed that there's been resonance left behind by whatever the weave was that was there. The weave was tested, which kind of means that it was done at least in heavy part, by a man. So that concerns the tower and leads them to assume that it was probably done by the Forsaken. And that obviously kind of scares them a little bit. They have to consider, what are the implications if the Forsaken are doing something and they are able to wield that much of the power? What can we do against that? And they determine that like a circle of Aes Sedai, like 13 women all linked together, are not powerful enough to overcome that. They can't do that. So they're like, this is kind of a problem. What are we going to do about that? So then you have one of the Aes Sedai, Moria, suggesting that they need to partner with the Black Tower, kind of have Ashaman around with them, because adding men into those circles would actually make them a lot more powerful. It would increase the power enough to actually potentially be able to combat whatever it was this, they presume, Forsaken power was. This suggestion obviously kind of causes a ruckus, because of course, men being able to channel is not the most comfortable thing in the world anyway, but these women definitely do not take that suggestion well at all. Egwene doesn't know herself whether to kind of support or oppose this suggestion. It's not really up to her anyway. The hall has to agree one way or the other on what to do. And they eventually do come to like the light agreement that they should probably at least approach the Black Tower regarding the situation, but they will have to make preparations on how to do so, and obviously have to agree on that to some degree as well. And chapter 20 sees that agreement coming to no real fruit, like no determination is made at all about how to approach the Black Tower. So, at the end of the day, the meeting's over. It's like no decision has been made. It'll have to be made at some point else. For now, Egwene returns to her tent to find her maid, Chesa, there. But suspiciously, Halima is not around yet. Normally, Halima's around in the evening because he is the only one that can, heal Egwene's massive headaches that she tends to get, because, of course, I'm pretty certain that it is Saidin that is making that possible. So, in either case, Halima is not around. That is suspicious. Egwene goes ahead and goes to bed, and she does some various dreaming activities. She goes into the realm in between Tel'aran'rhiod and the real world, the waking world, I suppose, and summons Elaine to come meet her in Tel'aran'rhiod in the usual spot, which is, I guess, a kind of different spot than where it normally is, because various of their previous normal spots have been eavesdropped a little bit too often. After a little while of waiting, Aviendha ends up coming in to Tel'aran'rhiod to meet Egwene, reporting that complications with being able to channel and the twins that Elaine is carrying there are complications with using magic that we kind of learned previously in last week's reading, that it can be a little bit harder to hold on to and grasp the power when pregnant. You can channel, it's safe to channel, but it might be harder to channel to some degree. In fact, I don't even know if I mentioned that last week, actually. That was something that was told to us last week. But either way, Aviendha is now meeting Egwene now because Elaine couldn't make it. She couldn't make it work. So Egwene tells Aviendha of the agreements that were going to be made between these rebel Aes Sedai and the Black Tower, that they're going to approach the Black Tower, and Aviendha kind of neglects to mention to Egwene that whatever happened with the beacon of power that was going on there was not the Forsaken, that was Rand and Nynaeve. She just doesn't mention it. I don't know why. This is like the one singular moment in the series of, well, maybe it's not the singular moment. It's the only moment that I can think of right now of the series so far where any of the characters has just straight up withheld information, or where like miscommunication has straight up been a, why would you not communicate that point, or something like that. Because people complain, at least in this sort of back half of the series of Wheel of Time, just, there's so much miscommunication. People don't tell each other things. And I'm sitting here like, I was literally thinking about this the other day. Like, how many times have I experienced that? Have I been frustrated by that? Maybe a couple of times, but if I have, I don't remember what about specifically, so clearly it's not actually that big of an issue, or rather, I personally don't take as much issue with it. This is the one moment here where Aviendha just kind of withholds this information that I'm not sure why she would withhold that information. Like, I guess it kind of makes sense. Maybe Elaine would have told Egwene. I don't know. Maybe they're not certain where it is that Egwene and the rebel Aes Sedai would fall with regard to Rand, or like what specific plans are. But even so, just say that like, hey, you don't have to go to the Black Tower to combat a Forsaken with this amount of power, because that wasn't the Forsaken that did that. Or, something along those lines. Just say it. She doesn't, which is confusing me just a tiny bit. But regardless, their meeting ends. Egwene slips into regular dreaming so that she can try to interpret some of her dreams, because she is, of course, a dream walker. Is that the term? I forget the term. I forgot all about that. But she does experience a couple dreams that she does kind of understand the meaning of. One of those dreams is seeing Matt kind of doing some bowling. Maybe not bowling like we understand it in the real world, but evidently very similar. Matt bowling, and the 9 pins representing some thousands of men that he, I guess, probably ends up being responsible for killing to some degree. Somehow an Illuminator is involved in this. Not entirely sure what's going on there, but there's some sort of dream regarding Matt. And then she also has another dream where she herself, Egwene, nearly falls to her death, but is saved by a Shan-Chan woman, which disconcerts her quite a bit. And then she sees a sort of figurative Shan-Chan as a collective attack the White Tower, which is obviously very concerning, and also kind of confuses her again, because she's saved by a Shan-Chan, and the Shan-Chan attacked the tower. So she's like, I don't know, but those are what she understands from her dreams. She is awoken after some of this by Halima returning to her tent very late at night. It's not even morning yet, and she goes back to sleep until the morning, where one of the other Aes Sedai comes in to tell Egwene, sending Halima away, that Anaya, one of the other Aes Sedai, and her warder are dead, suffocated seemingly by Sidon because of the resonance that was detected. They were killed in the night by presumably Sidon. We, of course, the readers, are 99.99999% certain that Halima is the one that did that. Like, there's no question about it. Obviously, the reason Halima came late to the tent was because she decided that she needed to kill a couple of the Aes Sedai. Why? I'm not 100% certain why Anaya specifically, but Egwene does wonder the same thing. But that is a pretty big revelation. That is a relatively big event. We're seeing Halima actually starting to come out in the open a little bit here. Yeah, and that moves us into the next couple chapters, 21 through 22, which are White Tower POVs. The first one is Alviarin, and the other one is Pavara. So the Alviarin chapter was actually quite packed. I really liked this chapter. This is arguably the best chapter of the book. Actually, it's definitely the most packed chapter of the book. Alviarin returns to the tower after about a month away from it, and returns to Elida's chambers specifically. I forget what it is that she wanted to check in with Elida about, but she did want to do that, and she finds that there are several sitters there. Most of the hall of the tower, of the actual White Tower, not the Rebel Aes Sedai this time, are meeting with Elida in her chambers up here. The sitters kind of discuss negotiations with the rebels, so I don't know if this is prompted by any preliminary action on the rebels' part. Presumably it's just the fact that the two groups of Aes Sedai are independently deciding they want to negotiate with the other one, just to kind of make the tower whole, because a whole tower is better than a split tower. So that's interesting. In this case, however, instead of Egwene's terms of Elida having to resign the Amyrlin seat position and then go into exile, Elida's terms for negotiations is that all of those sisters have to be, given penance before they are able to be readmitted to any of the Ajas. I'm pretty sure there's something more severe here as well with Elida's considerations for that, but there is definitely two groups of Aes Sedai that do want to negotiate with one another, but whose terms are pretty kind of not compatible. So that's a lot of political intrigue that's there. I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of that turns out. Alviarin does notice in this meeting that Taylene, which is one of the Black Aja, of course, looks at Yukiri and Dosine with reservation in this moment, because, of course, Yukiri and Dosine pretty, got her out. They know that she's Black Aja, of course, so Taylene kind of has to do what they want her to do. So that is something that Alviarin kind of notices, is this little look between these few of them there. After the sitters leave the meeting, Alviarin does try to threaten Elida, but Elida has a counter for pretty much all of those threats, including having already removed Alviarin as the keeper of the tower. The hall has already removed her and put somebody else up into that place. Elida also promises that Alviarin's going to be executed once she has enough evidence that Alviarin is a traitor. She doesn't say Black Aja specifically, but she pretty heavily accuses Alviarin of being a traitor to some degree. He's like, you will be dead because you're a traitor type of thing. Very unhappy with her. Alviarin assumes as a result that Elida knows that she is Black Aja. Again, she didn't say it outright, but we can assume that Elida knows that she is Black Aja. She's of that affiliation, and so she decides to call on her master, which is the Forsaken Messiana. Messiana comes and kind of goes to punish her, for the trifle of saying, I'm pretty sure Elida knows I'm Black Aja, and Messiana's like, it's fine, whatever. It's not going to be that serious, or maybe not it's not going to be that serious, or rather you're probably overreacting to this type of thing. So she goes to try to punish Alviarin, but instead the Great Lord, which I'm pretty sure is just straight up the Dark One, appears as a Myrddraal, or I guess the Myrddraal appears as the hand of the Great Lord in either sense. He shows up and punishes Messiana instead, and also marks Alviarin as the Dark One's own. So that's cool. Very epic moment there. The way that I explained the chapter definitely didn't make that come across nearly as epic as it was. And so the Myrddraal, the Dark One, whoever it is, does command Alviarin to deliver to him all of the threats to the Black Aja. So anybody within the tower who is an active threat. And that obviously means Elida. At least Alviarin knows that is going to have to include Elida, and she also decides that she's probably going to start her hunt for these threats of the Black Aja with Taylene, which could be bad, actually, since Taylene is obviously being kowtowed by a couple of threats to the Black Aja. So we'll see how that goes further on. It's, again, just seeds that are very interesting, that I'm really looking forward to seeing followed, that made these plot lines worth it. Chapter 22 moves us over to Pavara's POV within the tower, where she is having a meeting with Tarna. Sorry, not Tarna. She's having a meeting with somebody else. Oh, no, never mind. She is having a meeting with Tarna, who has been made the keeper in Alviarin's stead. Pavara worries, kind of to herself in this scene, this very short chapter here, whether or not Tarna is Black Aja, because apparently Galena had pretty specific interest in Tarna when she was a novice or an accepted or something like that, and because Galena was revealed as being Black Aja, Pavara's kind of suspicious of everybody that Galena kind of took interest in as a result. But Tarna does tell of some of the Ashaman recruiting that she encountered once, like a scene of several Ashaman recruiting men to be tested. Tarna and Pavara kind of talking about like what it is that they need to do about the Ashaman, about the Black Tower, generally speaking. Tarna's suggestion in the scene is that she thinks that Red Sisters, specifically the Red Aja, actually needs to bond them and make Ashaman warders as a means to be able to control them to some degree. Obviously, nobody really knows if you can gentle a man able to channel, if he's your warder, what that will actually do to you. But whether or not they can be gentled, she seems pretty insistent that, like, maybe the only way to control the Black Tower is to actually bond them. So, you know, that's going to be an interesting political idea to follow, especially considering that, again, the Rebel Aes Sedai are going to be making a move on the Black Tower at some point for alliance purposes soon. So between both sides of the White Tower going to the Black Tower, which is itself in maybe going to be in disarray at some point in the nearish future, it's a lot of stuff. Like, it's going to get pretty gross. It's going to get gnarly. Definitely a lot of tension politically around all of the Aes Sedai and the tower. Just a lot of really cool stuff that I'm looking forward to seeing. Pavara, to close out the scene, gives Tarna a paper that was apparently delivered by Tovine and came from Carrion, which reveals some information that we don't get to hear, the reader. It's something that Tarna says changes nothing and kind of hardens her resolve about that they need to, you know, bond the Ashaman to be able to control them. And then there's Pavara's statement after that no, actually it changes everything. It might even change the world. Seeing this in hindsight, after having just thinking about it for 2 more seconds, I'm pretty sure this note is coming from an Aes Sedai in Carrion that, you know, obviously met with Logain and the couple of Aes Sedai that he had bonded in Carrion, and is revealing that some of the Ashaman are bonding Aes Sedai. That would explain why Tarna would say that resolves, you know, further deepens her resolve, I guess. Sorry, English is hard. It deepens her resolve that they need to be bonding Ashaman. Of course, they would need to bond the Ashaman to avoid the Ashaman bonding them instead. That makes sense. That's probably what that note reveals. Looking at the runtime here, this would have been the shortest diary since, like, Lord of Chaos, if I was able to just cut it here, if I hadn't continued on to the next 2 chapters, and if I hadn't decided to include the next 2 chapters here. But alas, we're going to move on to chapters 23 and 24, which are Cadsuane and Rand POVs, basically. There's one final one that occurs at the very end of 24. We'll get there in due time. Chapter 23 is all Cadsuane POV, and in it we have Viren helping send some of the sea folk off to travel to select the mistress of the ships, you know, kind of that same thing that we saw in Elaine's POV with the revelation that the mistress of the ships has been killed and that a new one needs to be selected. So that's cool. The sea folk are leaving this group of people with Rand, wherever it is that they are. I don't even know. They are in the manor of some guy I've named Algarin, but I don't actually know where this manor is off the top of my head. Either way, Min summons Cadsuane to Rand in the chapter. Cadsuane does go to Rand, hearing that Algarin, who is, like I said, Lord of the Manor where they are staying right now, that Algarin wants to be tested to potentially become Ashaman, because apparently he had a brother at one point that could channel. So that's interesting. I don't know who Algarin is, but interesting nonetheless. Rand muses on the sort of Shan-Chan habit to collaborate, or rather think about every single battle after they've come after the battle to determine what went right, what went wrong, and what to fix about what went wrong. And this is the reason why the Shan-Chan army is like called the what is it, the Ever Victorious Army or something like that, where they've never lost a war. They've lost battles before, obviously, but they've never lost a war, and Rand is kind of fixating on this. Cadsuane mentions several generals in this part of the world that approach battles the same way. Davram Bashir is one of those mentioned. Gareth Brine is one of those mentioned. There's a couple others, like the one in Eredamon from the prologue that was mentioned in there. So, obviously some of these names are being brought up for very good reason. Rand is fixating on this point probably because, he wants to be able to win wars and wants to approach battles differently so that he can be a better leader, presumably, is kind of what's going on here. But at the very end of the chapter, a couple of Aes Sedai do interrupt this little meeting between them, where I don't know why Rand summoned Cadsuane to him, because nothing of import really between those two specifically was even said. Either way, Aes Sedai do interrupt, announcing that some warders of theirs have traveled and are approaching their location imminently. Which takes us into chapter 24, which sees that, speaking of Davram Bashir, he has come with Logain and some Aes Sedai with some of the Ashaman there, and then several of his soldiers have as well have all come to Rand. Various of the warders of some of the Aes Sedai that are with Rand were the beacons that they used to be able to follow and locate Rand in the first place. Loyal has also come with them, and he tells Rand near the start of the chapter that he and whoever the Ashaman that he was with, I forget his name off the top of my head, that they were able to visit all of the steadings except for the one from which Loyal comes from, and that the task that they were given, which was to make sure that all of the steadings way gates are guarded, because that's how, Shadow Spawn are being able to travel around in large numbers. Apparently, basically all of the steading have agreed to watch those way gates, all of those ways, excepting only the Borderlander steadings, and then a couple in a particular mountain range, it seems like. So it's only like 9, I believe the number was mentioned. 9 of the steadings are not watching the ways, but all of the rest are. So that's not a bad result, actually. It is also learned by both Cadsuane from some of the other Aes Sedai and by Rand from Loyal that Logain and some of the other Ashaman have been bonding some of the Aes Sedai. So the Aes Sedai that came to, do something about the Black Tower. All of the Aes Sedai that are part of the group that came are the warders of some of the Ashaman. Cadsuane does decide to send Samitsu, who's the one that tells her in this chapter, back to Carrion to kind of watch after some of the other sisters. I'm guessing, presumably, to make sure that they don't get bonded by an Ashaman. Presumably. That's my guess anyway. Rand also reprimands Logain pretty heavily for this, even though Logain says it was Taim's idea. And I might need clarification on this. Was this actually Taim's idea to bond Aes Sedai? I'm pretty sure it wasn't, because it was kind of mentioned earlier, like in the prologue, that only the Ashaman that are more allegiant towards Logain are the ones that have bonded Aes Sedai, and that none of the ones of Taim's faction have bonded Aes Sedai. So I'm wondering if this is just a slough off of the blame on Logain's part to say, oh, it was Taim's idea, because at the same time, Logain also tells Rand that Taim's doing some things against your wishes anyway. He's not being the most good faith in some of the things he's doing. So you need to return to the Black Tower. You need to make yourself a presence with them, because at this point Taim's doing enough stuff that maybe the Black Tower might split at some point, and if that happens, way more of those Ashaman are loyal to Taim than they are to you, and that's a problem. So Logain reports this. Like I said, I'm wondering if he just said that the idea to bond Aes Sedai was Taim's idea specifically to add to that fervor of you should do something about Taim type of thing. I don't even know. Taim also mentions that the Ashaman that are with Rand, that Rand decided to keep for himself as just to be around and to be helpful, that they have been put on deserter lists back at the Black Tower. So this is another point in kind of being behind Taim's back. Evidently there's a power struggle going on between them. Bashir also comes forward to tell of an attack that happened on Dobrain that of course we saw, and then also the ransacking of his own tent that apparently happened, plus the forged notes that seemed to come from Dobrain himself and Bashir himself, even though, like I said, they were forgeries. We kind of knew that from the prologue, but he informs Rand that there were forgeries, that the people, whoever it is that did the ransacking of the tent, that did the attack on Dobrain, that committed these forgeries, that these people might be looking for some of the seals to the Dark One's prison, which is obviously a very concerning thing at this point in time, because if all those seals go down, then the Dark One rises, and Rand doesn't really have time to think about that. And when he acknowledges this, he says that, yeah, I don't really have time to be at war with the Shan-Chan right now, and with the Dark One at the last battle, so what I'm going to have you guys do, and in this case he's speaking to Logain and Bashir and Loyal, these three specifically, he's like, I'm going to send you guys to form a truce with the Shan-Chan, and they're like kind of dumbfounded by this suggestion. I found it rather entertaining, but Rand has decided that he's going to try to make a truce with the Shan-Chan because he needs to be preparing for the last battle. He doesn't need to be at war with the Shan-Chan, so I'm curious to see how this will go. I mean, in some sense, it honestly makes sense, because like the Shan-Chan aren't the worst rulers in some of the places that they've come to lead in. Like in Abu Dar, for example, it was kind of commented that, hey, once people realize that the Shan-Chan aren't doing anything to the common citizenry, that they're basically still allowed to live their life however they want to, just it's kind of under new rule, basically. They don't really care to oppose the Shan-Chan that much because it means that they can live their lives basically freely. So I'm wondering if that angle, plus of course Matt having kidnapped Tuon, if Tuon will help in this regard. There's several political aspects to both Egwene's storyline and Rand's storyline that actually kind of fascinate me a little bit, so we'll see what goes on there. But that little tiny POV that ends chapter 24 that I mentioned before, that is Elsa, who is one of the Aes Sedai that's kind of been pretty fervently, like, aiding, serving Rand to a degree, has seemed to, Cadsuane, I believe it is mentioned, feels like there's like a weird form of like jealousy coming off of Elsa in regard to Rand, but it's not like romantic or anything like that. Why is that? Apparently it's because Elsa is just definitely just Black Aja. She has a warder who is also a dark friend. The reason, even though she's technically of the Green Aja, outside of being Black Aja, the reason why she doesn't have multiple warders is because it's hard to find dark friends who can be warders, so she only has one, and she kind of plays it off as if she's married to this warder, because apparently Greens will sometimes only have warder if they happen to be married to that warder or something like that. So in either case, like, Elsa has a dark friend warder and she herself is Black Aja, and I guess she tasks her warder to protect Rand and make sure that he stays safe, because her belief, now that she was made to swear fealty to Rand, she believes that Rand has to make it to the last battle, so she wants to see him safe enough to make it to the last battle. She's going to serve Rand in that way, because that will be the place where the Dark One needs to defeat Rand. So that's kind of her plot, which is an interesting angle that we haven't really seen up to this point. Very cool stuff. I guess the two Rand and Cadsuane chapters weren't bad after all. They were pretty cool, but the Egwene chapters were definitely the highlight of the book up to this point. Definitely my favorite part. But that is the end of the reading for this week. This diary is still going to be shorter than the last couple for sure, despite covering those extra couple of chapters, which means that the next diary will probably be quite short. We're going to be covering the rest of the book, which means chapter 25 through 30 plus the epilogue. So there's going to be like 3, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 3 Perrin chapters, 2 Matt chapters, 1 Egwene chapter, and then the epilogue. So kind of finishing up some stuff there. And based off of what both the Egwene POV is doing and the Perrin POV, I don't rightly recall the Matt POV well enough, but based off of what those 3 are doing, it makes sense for these 3 to be the ones that kind of come back in the end here. Because like most of what the first 2/3 of what this book was doing, it seemed like was kind of the reaction to the cleansing of the taint, seeing various of the other main characters like kind of experience that to one way or another, to one degree or another, in one way or another, whatever one of those. I combined them, 2 of those, I'm sorry. But you get to see that kind of reaction from most of the main characters. And then this like last third of the book here, or basically last third, last half of the book, depending on how you see it, is like kind of laying those seeds, laying that foundation for what is to come. So I can kind of see at this point why this book is frequently, it's associated with not really having any direction. I kind of said that in the last couple diaries, that like the main problem with the book is that it is bloated and that there's not as much active drive towards something. That is because definitely the first half of the book, even the first 2/3 to a degree, are largely kind of reacting to the end of book 9, and then everything after this is like actually laying the seeds for some of these major plot lines, and because like Perrin's POV, for example, seems like it's actually going to be coming to hopefully an actually important big moment. We'll see if that happens in the next 3 chapters. Doubtful with the way that Robert Jordan goes, and especially with the reputation of this book. But I do know that like whenever people talk about Crossroads of Twilight, they're like, there's one good chapter, and it's like when Perrin actually decides to do something. I know it has to do with the axe. I have had that much spoiled, but I'm guessing that the rest of this book is going to be not climaxes for any of these POVs, but actually getting us in a place to actually jump off in Knife of Dreams, theoretically hitting the ground running, so that you're not having to have as much active buildup in that book and can actually do things. That seems to be the reputation that these 2 books have in regard to one another, so that's kind of what I'm expecting. And in that way, I gotta say, I can't say that Crossroads of Twilight is not doing what it was trying to do, if that is what it is doing, reacting to book 9 and preparing to book 11. If that's what it's doing, then like, yeah, you could have cut maybe 70,000 words out of this package, made a much shorter book, but being a bridge book between the 2 isn't inherently a bad thing. Like, if it does that successfully, and up to this point, I think it's okay, but of course I have to read the last handful of chapters here, the last 6 chapters, to actually know. So join me next week for that. For now, I have been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and hopefully next week's diary is actually pretty short.